Mix and Megas is a permanent other metagame available on Pokemon Showdown under the permanent other metagame ladder. Within the tier, any unrestricted Pokemon can take any unbanned form-changing item and take the effects of their original holder. For example, Metagrossite or Shifu gets plus 40 speed, 10 attack, and a boost to both defenses, as well as the ability Tough Claws, and as such has become one of the most impactful Pokemon within the metagame. But some stones specifically have made impacts that have been considered too much for the tier, be it via too strong of stat boosts, abilities that are far too powerful, or simple type changes that, with another benefit, make the stone or form changing item too strong. And so with that, let's start with the Pidgeotite is the second youngest introduction to the ban list after the recently added Red Orb, and it finds itself in a category I call Big Weak Stones, which is to mean it's used to Mega Evolve a typically lackluster and bad Pokemon in Pidgeot, and as such its provided stats are far stronger than things like the Salamence, for example, which despite its offensive nature provides majority defense to ensure Salamence doesn't get a crazy base 200 attack stat after Mega Evolving. This category of stones actually take up a large majority of the ban list, but that isn't because this category itself is broken. In fact, many Pokemon with big, weak sort of stones still have their exclusive Mega Stones be unbanned. Things like the Pinsirite, Sablenite, and Blastoiseknite are all unbanned within Mix and Mega, despite all providing a stat boost of at least 30 to any given stat. What really pushes the Pidgeotite over the edge in Mix and Megas is its given ability and no guard, as well as incredible use alongside its plus 65 special attack boost. This gave it a lot of power, but compared to stones like the Blastoiseknite, it only had a slight edge on flat damage boosting. So many players consider the brokenness of the item to be more the fault of the users of the stone, rather than the stone itself. This went to the point of having all of Iron Bundle, Kilowattrel, and Golden Go be banned in the name of the Pidgeotite, and this all only ended when Magearna was being suspect tested, and the vote finally didn't find it guilty. And in this notion, the majority of the player base stared its eyes over to the Pidgeotite, and very shortly after, the Pidgeotite would get a suspect test where it would be banned in an insanely overwhelming 85 to 15 ban to not ban ratio. But what did the Pidgeotite abuse to make it get this notorious ban and power within the tier of legendaries? Well, it's really a mix of things. Its boost of special attack, while not too much on the surface, gave many mons access to moves that while would typically be bad or risky picks for coverage, alongside the Pidgeotite became incredible options for coverage and general damage output or status spreading. This can be seen in Iron Bundle as well as Magearna, with Iron Bundle taking advantage of Hydro Pump and Blizzard with no guard, as well as Freeze Dry to handle any resists such as Walking Wake. Iron Bundle was an insanely damaging threat within the tier, with its insane power threshold. On our other hand, Magearna had more power, with the trade-off that it had a far lower speed tier. But this really wasn't the drawback it presented itself as with its good bulk, it could live a plethora of attacks, especially with the slight boost to its defenses provided by the Pidgeotite, and let out insanely strong zap cannons, which not only threatened Pokemon with its increased power, but with its 100% paralyzation chance, which granted extreme utility to Magearna, as well as making Swampins essentially null, as Swampins would be paralyzed, and from there, wouldn't typically find themselves capable of outspeeding Magearna with their newfound halved speed thanks to the plus 20 to Magearna's base speed stat. In the end, the Pidgeotite was banned on August 9th of 2023, and despite the plethora of changes in the tier since, has never been considered for a retest in the tier thanks to its insanely overwhelming utility and power. Hey, remember that big weak stone concept I was talking about? Yeah, the Beedrillite is easily the most straightforward, no-talk version of that, providing the user with an astounding 60 attack and a crazy 70 hull speed, as well as a new ability and adaptability to further ensure no Pokemon could handle its attacks. While typically this is great, but not too much on Beedrill thanks to Beedrill's low stats, and generally bad coverage holding it back from having too much of an effect even with these benefits, these downsides are removed when put on Pokemon like Urshifu Rapid Strike, who could essentially OHKO any Pokemon in the tier with adaptability boosted Surging Strikes off of its new 190 base attack stat. This ban didn't happen this generation though. While it is banned this generation, it was actually first banned in the introduction of Mix and Megas all the way back in Generation 6, where it thrived off of threats like Weavile and Garchomp, both being two different selective uses of the item, with Weavile being an insanely strong and fast offensive threat, and Garchomp being an incredible Swords Dance setup sweeper with its newfound speed, and its attack ensuring that after just even a +1, its 190 attack adaptability boosted Earthquakes would kill just about everything barring Latiasite users and flying types, who only lived thanks to their immunities, and would typically promptly die to a coverage or dragon move afterwards. The final last mon discovered for its use just prior to its ban was Haxorus, who really speaks for itself. With a higher attack stat than Garchomp and access to Dragon Dance to make up for its slightly lower speed, Haxorus could essentially OHKO anything. This includes Heatran with max HP, Slowbro Blissey's, Slowbro Sylveons, and even having a 50% odd to KO a Latiosite Heatran after Stealth Rock damage. Given all of this, the Beedrillite's ban was expected and occurred on May 11th, 2015, barely a month after the tier itself had started, and has not been allowed since. For this part, we'll cover two very similar stones that were, much like the Beedrillite, banned back in Generation 6 and have not been allowed since. But they do have an interesting history of attempting to be freed via really odd, complex bans, so I will cover those. Originally, after the release of Mix and Megas, these two stones were immediately banned, but it was oddly argued that these stones should be allowed on Hustlemons, or at least tested on them to see if they may work. And the reason for this actually has a bit of real depth. The reason provided for this was that many Pokemon that have Hustle, at least before Generation 9, had a very lackluster attack stat, with the highest attack stat prior to Generation 7, 8, or 9 being Darumaka, the pre-evolution of Darmanitan. Now would this get anywhere? No. Even if most Hustle users would be Delibird plus a bunch of pre-evos, Darumaka with Medicham boost would still have a 130 base attack stat, as well as pure power to further push this over the edge. But some mods were thought to be fine, with the argument persisting slightly in essence throughout the first few months of Mix and Mega's incarnation, in which many players wanted to at least see it on Togekiss, who would only manage out a base 90 attack stat after boost, but this would, as I stated earlier, get nowhere. Complex bans like this are generally frowned upon, and while maybe it would be interesting to see Darumaka smash through Groudons and Urshifu Rapid Strikes, it really wasn't practical to ask such a niche and thin-veiled question, as it opens the door to many other questions, like the ever-present example of why not just allow Kyogre and OU at level 60 or with only one move slot. Complex bans like this open the door to many players to make more and more niche bans that keep an item or Pokemon present within a tier, and so as such the idea was rejected, and Medicham and Mawilite would sadly never see the light of day within Mix and Megas, even within the first creation of it. Hey, so you remember that huge power thing? Well, I mean, I'd hope you won't forget it already. Yeah, what if we gave that to a mon, but only half of it? Surely that's okay, right? No, it's not. The ban for Rusted Sword did have a bit more depth than that, as the Rusted Sword also provided the user with the incredible Steel typing, 30 more base attack, and 10 more speed. But really, the most prominent effect here was really just Intrepid Sword, and the fact it gave any mon a guaranteed Kickstarter into a sweep. Now, the ban does have a bit of interesting history to it. At the time, the Rusted Sword had just been introduced to Mix and Mega via an update that saw all form-changing items be available for use, like the Rusted Shield, Adamant Orb, and Primal Orbs. But easily the best of these items was the newly introduced Rusted Sword, which, unlike the rest, was banned only a few weeks after the introduction of all these form-changing items, on March 12th, after the suspect test for it had ended. But the Rusted Sword's ban occurred at an odd time, taking place just after Terra's ban within Mix and Mega, which was done as users of some of these items, such as the Rusted Shield and Rusted Sword, could terastallize, as well as for a few other reasons. Shortly after Terastallization's ban though, players still wanted to see the Rusted Sword banned. Reason being was Corley, its typing benefit, actually really assisted Pokemon in battle, at least with longevity. This was mostly promoted through the use of mons such as STABmons, Baxcalibur, and Roaring Moon. The reason for this was that their Dragon typing was all their primary typing, meaning they could choose to replace their respective typing, be it Flying, Ice, or Dark, with the Steel typing, which is a perfect pairing with the Dragon typing, giving an incredible stab option for fairies, as well as removing their prior weakness to them in general. This mostly stood out due to Mix and Mega's plethora of fairy threats with the abuse of Altarionite and mons like Regieleki and Dragonite, giving Ruined Sword users a way to both resist as well as defeat these powerful users. And while this all sounds good and dandy, this really wasn't as healthy as I'm making it sound right now, because yeah, defeating a powerful threat and keeping it in check was in fact good, but these Ruined Sword users did a lot more than just that. After defeating an Altarionite user, or just finding any opening really, they could easily Dragon Dance or Swords Dance up and begin a full match sweep that was almost unavoidable, other than with niche users like Slowbro Corviknight or Unaware users, which had a huge negative in that Mega Evolving would remove their ability, and as such, leave them incredibly vulnerable to other mons within the tier. In the end, all of this was simply proved too overwhelming. With a lack of offensive or defensive checks, and an overwhelming damage output almost comparable to huge or pure power, it wasn't really a shock it was banned. After all, just look at how good Zacian Crowned is in standard play, and now give its benefits to absolutely everything. Now, this one is a short one, and not one that I really need to describe as much as you just have to hear 2 words. Shadow Tag. Gengarite, no matter how good or bad its stats provided are, which for the record, they're very good, would be banned, and that's because Shadow Tag literally immediately invalidates any counterplay to it. The reason being, any tank or wall in the tier was immediately invalidated if a mon just Gengarited straight in front of them, and there's no limit on who to put it on. You could place it on a wall breaker special attacker, or just a setup threat with Dragon Dance, basically anything, and it'd succeed at what you want it to do. Within Generation 6, the only Pokemon who could use the Gengarite, which even now are actually excluded from using it as well, were mons that already had Shadow Tag as their ability, as well as Gengar itself. This only really leaves a few mons, mostly being Gothitelle and Wobbuffet, but this was removed in later gens since it was simply too strong still, and really just uncompetitive nature with how punishing it made any wrong play. As such, it was banned, immediately, without any contest to its ban. Gengarite has been entirely banned since forever. Okay, so that last one was a lot, and this one's more. This stone is just a mess. It's good on basically everything. Physical threats love the speed boost, as well as extra damage offered via the massive flat plus 40 boost to attack, and every Pokemon love the general boost to defenses. But you know that a Spatfire Pokemon? Yeah, this stone also basically made any stored power user into a pseudo-stronger version of it. With Calm Mind, Amnesia, Iron Defense, and stored power, mons like Iron Crown and Magearna would become insanely broken, and were basically uncontestable with their insane snowball effect throughout the tier. And stored power users weren't the only special attackers that appreciated the Blazikenite. Other mons like Darkrai Now and Walking Wake could also appreciate it. Now, they never got to use it, as it was banned prior to them getting access to stones, but nonetheless, the ability to so quickly snowball into a sweep with essentially no effort was really insane, especially because almost any Pokemon could do it, and it only really took one turn to lose to it. But with the talk of special attackers, don't get it mixed. The Blazikenite best benefited physical sweepers to being even stronger, most notably mons like Ursaluna and King Gambit, who appreciate the extra speed boost from the stone, which alongside Protect, Swords Dance, Sucker Punch, and other options, made them essentially unstoppable in a matter of seconds. These sets did struggle though with longevity, so one other threat emerged to counter that problem, Surulege, which had access to Bitter Blade to ensure it could get insane speed, massive damage with Swords Dance, and use Bitter Blade to easily kill anything barring Flash Fire mons, and get massive recovery via it as well. With all of this, the Blazikenite is unsurprisingly banned, and has been since Generation 6, which allowed it on any Pokemon that already had Speed Boost and no others. But within Generation 9, the stone is simply banned to keep rolls cleaner, and since it can be insanely annoying on good threats with Speed Boost as well. You didn't think the stone wouldn't be here, would you? Nah, just because it's the last one, that doesn't change a thing. This stone is easily, unanimously, absolutely, certifiably broken. Yeah, its ability got nerfed in Generation 7, but who really cares? It's so insanely good with its stat boost and its ability to make moves like Seismic Toss and Iron Head hit twice that it really isn't a shocker it's banned. Its core use was on faster threats to use Seismic Toss, which due to the nature of the move, always dealt 100 damage a blow, dealing 200 damage after both strikes. But if this wasn't enough, which it was, as it essentially made swapping into it with a tank impossible, as after 2 Seismic Tosses, most tanks, other than maybe, I don't know, Blissey, were guaranteed to die and leave their team without a key piece of a match. Parental Bond also made moves like Iron Head and Dark Pulse absolutely earth-shatteringly annoying, being basically a pseudo-Serene Grace for absolutely every Pokemon, plus extra damage. So picture this. Roaring Moon gets 1 Dragon Dance, you swap to a tank to beat it or phase it out, and you flinch. And then you flinch again. And then you flinch again. Yeah, the Kangaskhanite wasn't the best stone, honestly, nor is it probably in the top 3 in stones I mentioned today, but its simple, downright uncompetitive nature with Iron Head and Seismic Toss made it a very obvious ban, and so it's not much of a surprise that it wasn't even tested within Generation 9 before it was fully banned from the tier. The final stone for today isn't really one I can talk about, being the Red Orb, which I made a video on just a few weeks ago, which goes majorly in depth on it, and its lifetime throughout Generation 9's Mix and Mega tier, so please feel free to go check that out through the pinned comment if you'd like to learn more. But for today, that's all I really have to talk about. Thank you for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoyed. If you have any ideas for future videos, then let me know down below, and I'll add it to my ever-growing list of video topics to cover, and I hope to see you all next time. Thank you.